We are in the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel. And the 11th chapter is one of the chapters that are, excuse me for a moment, not wrought with as much controversy as some of the other chapters may be. Most commentators agree about the individuals being spoken of throughout this chapter. And as you were introduced to the beginning of the chapter, we know that as we get down to verse 7, as I understand is where you got to, we are talking about two groups of individuals, that being the kings of the north and the kings of the south. Now I reiterate to you again, as I've spoken many times, about this. I'll say again, remember that the point of view is from that of being a Jew. So north, south, east, and west would be that from that of Palestine. And so when we're talking about the kings of the north, we're talking about a king of the north, someone who is north of Palestine, or of maybe Jerusalem specifically, depending on the particular vision that may be in view. But particularly in this chapter, that's exactly what we're talking about. The Holy Land, or the land of Palestine, the land that God gave to his people, and returned them to, or would return them to, as they are coming out of captivity. So these are kings or people that would have power, be influential at this period of time, and it would be the end of the Greek Empire, or is the time that we are talking about, that was identified in the earlier verses in the chapter. So when we're talking about the kings of the north and the kings of the south, specifically we're talking about the Seleucid kingdom being the kings of the north, and the Ptolemaic kingdom being the kings of the south, or those individuals in those kings that were in Egypt. Now, remember, those kingdoms are now under Greek rule. They're under Greek influence. Now, Egypt is kind of a hybrid, if you would, of ideas and thoughts and culture. It maintains a great deal of its Egyptianness, if that is a word, but it is also overcome and ruled by the Greek people, and the generals of the descendants of the generals of Alexander the Great. So this is where we will start, and we're at point C. If you have my outline of those deals, but there's not really too much to outline. As we go verse to verse, we'll talk about particular individuals. Now, if you have your old world empires, you will want to go down to that section where it talks about the kings of the north and the kings of the south. I've got them lined out. And some of these individuals, I was able to even find references and coins or busts of these individuals, so you have a little bit of an idea of what these individuals actually look like at that period of time. And I have approximate dates on the sides, if you have that, and I can get one to you if you don't have one, or if you want one. And then again, let me tell you, these dates are approximate. I don't claim to be a Greek historian by any stretch of the imagination. I've taken my dates from a combination of the Encyclopedia Britannica and other historians, and so I'm not going to argue about the exact dates. I'm just not going to do it. I really don't care. And the scriptures don't give exact dates. It talks about individuals and some of the things they will do. That's the only thing I care about. Okay. But this will kind of give you a little bit easier way of remembering what these individuals did and who they were. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth as I am able to from one thing to another here. I'll close that one out because this is not what I was trying to find. The paraphrase that actually mentions each individual's names, but I cannot. There's one paraphrased, and it is paraphrased. I will not call it a version. It is a paraphrased where they actually plug in the names. It is so well accepted by so many historians that there is a paraphrased version or two out there that instead of saying the king of the north and the king of the south, they'll actually just plug in the name of the individual that history says they were. And actually I'll be reading from that, from this particular commentator here as we get to it. All right. So we're down in verse 7. In verse 6, we're now talking about Bernice, that she didn't always follow what there was in verse 6 there was an agreement made between the kings of the north and kings of the south, and see the way they made agreements, the way they made pacts, the way they made what we would call a no, between heads of states, they make a agreement between them, and we call that a treaty. Thank you. I hate it when I can't find the word I'm looking for. The way they made treaties often was to give a daughter or give a son in marriage, and that would bind those two countries together. We see that in all the way through the Old Testament with the kings of Israel and of Judah, and often that was done much to their detriment. But nonetheless, this is how treaties were often done, and one person would feel like they had control over another one because they had part of their family member down there, and they would report back what's going on, and perhaps they could thwart anything that was going on. So if an army was being built up, they would know about it ahead of time. And you can see all the subterfuge that would happen with all of this, and that's exactly what took place. And so these cousins, both being Greeks, fought amongst each other, and they fought over the land, and they fought over power and money, and they fought over the land of Palestine. And the land of Palestine was valuable for what reason? So trade routes. There was often trade routes that went through Jerusalem and other places that they wanted that tax money. It's all about the same thing as today, right? Everybody wants their tax money. They want their tribute, and that's how they succeeded. Continued to do their government. So they were willing to fight and raise an army in order to advance their particular cause. Okay, so in verse 7, it talks about a shoot out of her roots, and the shoot her roots would be that out of Bernice. Will stand up in his place, and who shall come unto an army, and he shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal against them and shall prevail. So again, now what he's talking about is he's going to raise an army, and he's going to come up against him, and he's going to win a battle. So we're seeing a battle going back and forth. If you jump down to the timeline that I gave to you, That puts us in this area here where Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy, and she's not going to do exactly what anyone would want, and she poisons everybody and puts her own son on the throne. So that's how she maintains control. All right. All right, so they end up having a war. Okay, and so dropping down, and he returns and lives the rest of his reign in peace. So for a period of time, there's a peace because he goes back home, he got what he wanted, and he's not going to do anything more for this period of time. All right, so in verse 9 we drop down. He shall come to the realm of the king of the south, and he shall return into his own land. Okay, so the Seleucid king now, the northern king, campaigns, and he returns home. All right, so he has a battle. So we see these battles go back and forth, and if you look at all the timelines, and I know it's difficult to go from one screen to the other, king of the north, king of the south over here. If you see those, you'll see that they're just battling back and forth. One battles a little bit, one gains a little bit of time, one gains a little bit of ground, and the other one. But through all of this, the land of Palestine changes hands. Okay, and his son, Seleucus II, Solder. So here's Seleucus II. All right. Had 3 sons who ruled: Seleucus II, Antiochus II, and Seleucus IV shall engage in war, and Antiochus III shall attack the king of the south. So we've already talked about in a previous chapter about Antiochus III, which is known as the Great. This is the father of Antiochus Epiphanes, which we know a lot about.
Amplified Bible is the one you're looking for.
The Amplified Bible? I'm not going to try to pull it up now. I'm way too far into the class, but thank you. Since we're not going to get done with that this week, I can see already, because I'm eating up all my time, maybe I'll do that next week. So you may have another week after all.
But it's got all those names you reference that gets there in there.
Okay, fabulous. Okay. Okay, so in verse 11, and the Egyptian king Ptolemy IV, Philopator, shall fight against him, and this is the battle of Raphia in 217. So we need to drop down here. This is Ptolemy IV, Philopator, and shall be victorious. So Antiochus the Great, he's called the Great for a reason, because he advances a great deal of his empire. Now he pushes in a lot of different directions, but notice when the Bible talks about him, they're only concerned with when the land of Palestine is crossed. So if you read about Antiochus III, the Great, you're going to see him conquering a great deal of land. All right? And the land of Palestine is just his little bitty footnote. But the thing that we see here is this is talked about in the scriptures because it affects God's people. That's why it's important here. So that's why we need to understand the difference. It's not because Antiochus III the Great didn't conquer other lands and other places. It's just that the focus is on the land of Palestine. It's upon the Jewish people and how these rulers affect the Jewish people. Okay? All right? Verse 12, and the king of Egypt and his army shall be elated at such success, but it will not last. So they fight back and forth. Philopator is able to fight back, and you'll notice in 712 he loses against Ptolemy IV at Raphia. Okay, so but he tells him, this is not going to last. Now see, all of this detail is shown in the scriptures some 200 and 250 years before it's even going to take place. And it's great detail. So if there's any proof of God being the author of this book, we're seeing it right now. So pay a little attention to it. I know it's tedious to read, but pay a little attention to it. God is proving He is who He is, and I am doing this thing. I am totally in control. I'm going to use these events of evil men in order to be in control and bring about the Christ and bring about those things which I want to bring about. Okay. All right. 13. The Seleucid king Antiochus III shall rise another army greater than the first, and after some time he will attack again. So as we go on down, we'll see the second, in 198, the second expedition against Ptolemy IV, he gains Palestine with the help of the Jews. So the Jews get involved in this. Excuse me. All right, so again, this time he prevails. The first time, remember, the king of the south prevailed, but it says it wasn't going to last. And it didn't last. Second time, Antiochus III the Great came against him, and he did not prevail. Verse 14, and this time warlike Jews will ally themselves with Antiochus III and thus help him to victory, but this will be their own undoing themselves up to establish a vision, but they shall fall. Okay, so just as we have talked about here in the Palestinian, the Jews helped him at Panium. These Jews that now have allied themselves with Antiochus III the Great, it's not going to work out to their advantage, is it? And we're going to see that getting worse and worse and worse when his son, his third son, I think it is, Antiochus IV Epiphanes comes to the throne. And now they have allied themselves with somebody that is evil to the core. Okay. All right, verse 15. So Antiochus III shall take a well-fortified city of Sidon, and the Ptolemy general Scopas will take refuge after his defeat at Panium and give Palestine to the Seleucids. And Scopas now serving Ptolemy IV, fifth Epiphanes, and had Ptolemy IV. So it shows some of those things that's going to take place, and they happen in history just as the scriptures reveal. Just as it is revealed to Daniel and as he writes it down. And like I said, these events of history, like I said, it's a little difficult to go through them, but you're going to find out that these things actually take place just the way the scriptures has revealed it. Okay, the king of the Seleucids, verse 16, will on this occasion be unbeatable, and he will thus gain control of Palestine. Okay, so remember the southern kingdom, was it Ptolemy IV, I believe it was, had control of Palestine, but now it falls under the power of the king of the north. As we read a few verses earlier, it's going to be to their own undoing, as we see Antiochus IV the Great, Antiochus IV Epiphanes come to power. And he shall seek to establish his home front by exercising his power in an equitable way towards the Jews, and contracting a marriage between his daughter Cleopatra, his political pawn, and the boy Ptolemy V. This arrangement did not work out to his advantage. So if we run down here, the boy king is defeated by Antiochus, and Cleopatra is given to his father, is to report to her father, but she does not always side with her father. Well, that's the first time that ever happened, right? Put somebody else in a situation that is different for them, or they get into a marriage and all of a sudden they don't do what mommy and daddy tells them to. Yeah, that's never happened before. Okay. That's exactly what happens here. Okay. Then Antiochus III, verse 18, turns his attention to the coast of Asia Minor and Thracia, and Greece, and a Roman general shall put an end to his attack on their dominions in 191 BC at Thermopylae, and he was defeated by Galbrio. I will not try to pronounce his first name. And again at Magnesium, and he was defeated by Cornelius Scorpio. He is shackled by crippling tax and loses all the property west of the Tarshish mountains. He shall turn his attention to his own territory in Persia, where he will die. And so that's exactly what the end of Antiochus III the Great. Okay, we're now down to verse 20. And we see that now his son, Antiochus III's son, Seleucus IV Philopator, will come to power and will send his prime minister, Helodrius, throughout his kingdom to raise money. Soon after the money-raising expedition, Seleucus IV will be slain by Helodrius as a political expedient. So there's a usurper. The usurper comes to power. Antiochus III's son now is died, and so there's a usurper that comes to the throne. Then the contemptible Antiochus IV Epiphanes shall take the throne. Now, like I said, we've studied a lot about him, and we know he is, calling him a contemptible person is not an understatement. And so it was not that the kingdom wasn't given to him, but by flattery, Antiochus IV will win the support of Emenes, the king of Asia Minor, who will help him gain the throne of the Syrians, who will give in peaceably. So it's by flatteries. And remember, when last time we talked about Antiochus IV, we were talking about the fact he was an individual who uses flatteries. He used deceitful means to gain power and to maneuver people, manipulate people. And that's exactly what the scriptures is talking about here. Okay. All right. And he shall be successful in war against great armies. That Ptolemy IV, again, that's the king of the south, in 170, and he will depose Onias III, the prince of the covenant, which is the high priest. Remember, he put one person on as the high priest as his political expedient. And these individuals paid money in order to gain the high priesthood. So it went from one person to another person to another person, as you recall. Verse 23, they made leagues with him But he will work deceitfully against all his allies, and he will gain much power through the Syrian people, which are not large. Now, at this period of time, the Syrian people weren't a large people. They weren't necessarily a powerful people. But he's going to gain a great deal of power through all the subterfuge that he uses. He's going to get people on his side, makes promises that he can't keep, and a few other things, but eventually he's going to gain enough power, nobody wants to challenge him much. We haven't seen that in the political realm lately, have we? We see that all the time. I don't have to just talk about people recently. We've seen that all the time throughout history. People through deceitful means get into power, and they eventually work the army around with them, and then people are scared of them, and by murdering or killing or using some type of power, they manipulate themselves into such a position everybody's scared to death of them and nobody wants to raise up against them. This is exactly what he has done and is doing there. Okay? Verse 24, he will be a shrewd man who will wait. I guess I should just put that on what the scripture says so you can follow me there, couldn't I? That would probably be why didn't somebody say that? Verse 24, he will be a shrewd man who will wait his best opportunity to make his moves against the places he has desired, and he will set a precedent for lavish giving to ensure his stability. He will use cunning in going against enemy forces. He will succeed in all of this for a while. Okay? Even for a time, the scripture says. This is a paraphrased version. I believe Charles said it was the Amplified.
Yeah, you may be in a different one than that, but it hasn't lined up exactly.
Okay.
It's very similar, but so maybe another one.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm very dry again. Okay, verse 25, he will engage in war against Ptolemy IV, who will be defeated partly by sedition and desertion in his own army. Okay, so, things just don't go well for the poor young boy king, Ptolemy this is Ptolemy VI. I thought it was Ptolemy IV, but it's Ptolemy VI. And verse 26, some close associates of the Ptolemy king will aid in his defeat, and his army will be overflowed and many slain. Okay. All the apparent candor and joint projects discussed only mask evil intentions. Neither of these kings will ultimately benefit anything, since their end is appointed by God. Both kingdoms will fall. And he shall turn to his own land with much booty and persecute Israel much, and then return to Syria. Now we talked in great length about after he had won that first battle, he went back, he was pretty proud of himself, and that how many of the Jews had converted is not the right word to use. They had defiled themselves with Greek ways of doing things. Remember we talked about the gymnasium, the way they educated themselves, and things of this nature, even the idea of circumcision. They tried to hide their circumcision and things of this nature. even going to the point of having surgeries to hide their circumcision. And so this is, you know, these Jews gave up everything that was important to them as far as the law of Moses and things of this nature to ally themselves with an evil, conniving, vicious individual. I don't know if in hopes of staying alive, because he slew a lot of he killed a lot of people, or they agreed with the Greek culture, and some did agree with the Greek culture. But combination of all those things, it was just an evil time all the way around. Verse 29, when God had it planned, is the way it reads here, but at the time appointed, it's when it was going to take place. Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes would again strike Egypt in 165 BC, but this time he will not be successful as before. For ships from Cyprus, a Roman dominion bearing Roman envoys shall come and order his withdrawal. He will return in humiliation and exercise his rage upon the temple, the people of God, while making use of apostates of the Holy Covenant. Remember we talked about Scripto drawing a circle around him. He said he was told to withdraw because Egypt had requested help from Rome, and he was told to withdraw, and he said, I would think about it. And the Scripto drew a circle around him and told him, says, think about it before you leave the circle. And the implication is, if you step out of the circle without giving an answer, you have just declared war on Rome. That is the implication. And that is as far as we're going to get tonight, because my time is up. Like I said, forgive me, I know this is just a lot of history, but this is important that we know that so many years before these things would happen, God had laid out for the Jewish people exactly what was going to take place. And that should give us great hope, knowing these prophecies were true. Does anyone have any